Marcus Webb had a rule about regulars. You learned their order. You learned their name. You did not learn anything else, because the moment you did, the cafe stopped being a place where people came to escape their lives and started being a place where their lives followed them in. It was a good rule. It had kept him sane for 6 years. He broke it on a Tuesday in October, which was, in hindsight, when everything started. The cafe was called Groundwork. 12 tables, exposed brick, an espresso machine that cost more than his first car and made it sound like a small aircraft preparing for takeoff. Marcus had built it with severance pay from an engineering firm that no longer existed, a business loan that still made him sweat at night, and the stubborn belief that the neighborhood on the corner of Ashby and 5th deserved one honest cup of coffee. 6 years later, the loan was almost paid off. The neighborhood had changed around him. Luxury condos ate the buildings on either side. A juice bar appeared across the street, but Groundwork stayed the same. Same brick, same machine. Same Marcus in the same canvas apron at 5:50 every morning, grinding beans before the rest of the city woke up. He wasn't lonely. That was what he told his sister when she called from Portland every 2 weeks asking if he was seeing anyone. He was busy. There was a difference. She came in for the first time on a Wednesday in early September. He noticed her because of the gloves. It was 74 degrees outside. Not glove weather by any interpretation. They were thin, the color of smoke, fitting closely to her hands, and she wore them with the practiced ease of someone who had worn gloves her entire life. She was tall, nearly 6 feet, with pale gray skin that Marcus assumed, in the soft morning light, was either very fair or some kind of medical condition he wasn't going to ask about. Her hair was dark, hanging straight to her shoulders. Her eyes were unusual. Violet, or something very close to violet, with a quality to them that Marcus couldn't name immediately and spent the next several days trying to. They caught light in a way that didn't entirely make sense. "Medium drip," she said when she reached the counter. Her voice was measured, not accented exactly, but careful, as though each word had been selected from a list of options. "Name?" Marcus asked. She paused, which was unusual in itself. Nobody paused at that question. "Vera," she said. He wrote it on the cup. She paid in cash, exact change, and sat at the corner table, the one with sight lines to both the door and the window. She spent 40 minutes there with a small notebook, writing things Marcus couldn't see from behind the counter, and then she left. She came back the next morning. Medium drip, corner table, exact change, and the morning after that, and every morning for the next 6 weeks. Chapecans. By the 3rd week, Marcus knew her order without asking. By the 4th, she had started nodding at him when she came in. A small, precise nod, like something she was practicing. By the 5th, she said, "You remembered," when he handed her the cup, and he said, "It's a medium drip, not a state secret." And she laughed. It was the kind of laugh that surprised her. He noticed that, too. She began staying longer. An hour, sometimes 2. She was always there when the morning rush hit, the laptop crowd, the nurses from the hospital 2 blocks over, the retired couple who ordered the same thing in the wrong order every day, and she watched them with a focus that Marcus found either fascinating or slightly alarming depending on his mood. "You study people," he said one morning when the rush had thinned and he came out from behind the counter to wipe down the tables. "Is that unusual?" she asked. "Most people study their phones." She glanced at the table next to her, where a man in a suit was thumbing through emails with the dead-eyed concentration of someone who had forgotten that mornings could be something other than a problem to solve. "His left hand hasn't stopped moving for 20 minutes, she said. "He's agitated, but he keeps buying coffee, which means he doesn't want to leave. Which means whatever is waiting for him outside is worse than the agitation." Marcus set down his cloth. "Okay," he said. "That's either very perceptive or very unsettling. Why can't it be both?" He laughed. She looked at him the way she had looked at the man in the suit, with that careful, cataloging attention, as though she was storing the data for something. He went back behind the counter. He thought about her for the rest of the day. In October, she started arriving earlier. 6:05, sometimes before the second batch of beans had finished grinding. She began ordering small things to eat, a muffin, a piece of toast, and Marcus noticed that she ate them with the focused deliberateness of someone learning a new language. like the act of eating a blueberry muffin from a paper bag while sitting in a cafe in the morning, was a text she was translating, slowly, phrase by phrase. He asked her once what she did. "I'm between things," she said. "Between what things?" She turned her cup slowly in her gloved hands. "Between where I was and where I'm going." That's either very philosophical or a great way to avoid the question. "I've found," she said, "that sometimes they're the same thing." He had no answer for that. He wrote her name on cups that already had her name on them. He made sure the corner table was available before she arrived. He started keeping a small ceramic pot of honey on the side counter because he'd noticed once that she'd looked at the honey dispenser for a long moment before deciding not to use it, and he'd thought about that long enough to realize the dispenser was probably unfamiliar to her, which meant a ceramic pot was a kindness she wouldn't have to ask for. She used it every morning from then on. He didn't mention it. Neither did she. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Thursday morning near the end of October. She was late. It was 8:43. Marcus knew because he'd looked at the clock twice, when the door opened and she came in moving differently than usual. Faster. Her coat was pulled high at the collar, and her eyes scanned the room before she'd fully stepped inside, landing on Marcus, then the back exit, then the window. She sat down. He brought the coffee without being asked. "Everything all right?" he said. "Yes." Then, quietly, "Is there another way out of this building?" Marcus looked at her for a moment. "There's a service door through the kitchen. Opens to the alley on Clement." She nodded. "Thank you." He went back to the counter. He kept an eye on the front window without trying to look like he was keeping an eye on the front window, which was something he'd apparently gotten better at since she started coming in. Two men walked past. They were too tall. That was the first thing. Both over 6'5", in dark coats that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the morning light. They moved with a deliberateness that didn't match the pedestrian rhythm of the street, and one of them turned his head as he passed the window and looked directly into the cafe. His eyes were the same unusual quality as Vera's, catching light wrong. Marcus felt something cold move through his chest without being able to name it. When he looked back at the corner table, Vera was watching him. "Friends of yours," he said. "No," she said. "She left through the kitchen." She came back the next morning like nothing had happened. Marcus waited until the cafe had emptied out before he walked over and sat down across from her. He hadn't done that before. She looked at him with something that might have been wariness, or might have been calculation. "I'm not going to ask you to explain anything," he said, "but I am going to tell you that if those men come back and cause a problem in this cafe, I need to know enough to handle it." "What kind of handling are you thinking?" she said. "The civilian kind. Call the police, keep the customers calm, that sort of thing. Nothing heroic." She turned her cup in her hands. The bioluminescent marks along her collarbone. He hadn't known what they were then, had just noticed them occasionally above her collar in certain lights, pulsed faintly. "They won't come inside," she said. "There are too many people. They prefer clean situations." "Who are they?" She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a bus went past, and two pigeons argued over something in the gutter. "People who are looking for something I have," she said finally. "Something I'm not going to give them." "Okay," he said. "Okay, you're not a criminal. I've been watching people come in and out of this room for 6 years, and I know what someone looks like when they're the danger and when they're running from it." He stood up. "You're the second kind." She looked at him for a long moment with those violet eyes that caught light wrong. "You are very unusual," she said. "I work in coffee," he said. "We have to be good listeners." He found out what she was on a Sunday night when she knocked on his apartment door above the cafe. He'd given her his number 2 weeks earlier, after the incident with the men outside. She'd never used it. He'd half expected her not to. When he opened the door, she was standing in the dim hallway with a cut above her left eyebrow that was bleeding silver. Not red. Silver. Marcus stared at it for exactly 3 seconds. Then he stepped back and said, "Come inside." She sat at his kitchen table while he found the first aid kit. He cleaned the cut. Her skin, up close, was cool to the touch and faintly luminescent in the low light of his kitchen. The gray silver of it unmistakably not human. And he put a bandage over it without saying anything. She waited for him to say something. He put the first aid kit away. He put the kettle on. He sat back down across from her and looked at her properly for the first time. "Okay," he said, "tell me." Her name was Valera Kostherin. Her species was called the Threnali. She had been on Earth for 11 months, hiding in the city with documentation that she would not explain the origin of, working her way through what she called a contact window, a period during which she needed to remain undetected in order to complete a transmission. She was, she told him, the last surviving member of the Theron royal family. "Which makes you a queen," Marcus said. "An heir. The queen was my mother." She paused. "She was killed 14 months ago." "I'm sorry." She looked at him as if that was the wrong response, and then as if it was the right one, both within the same moment. The Covenant, a governing body of 7 species that controlled a significant portion of the galaxy's inhabited systems, had moved against the Threnali because of something encoded in the royal bloodline. Every heir of the Theron family carried, woven into their genetic sequence at birth, the coordinates of the Threnali seed vault. The vault wasn't a physical place. It was a distributed data repository containing the complete genetic archive of the Threnali species, their history, their technology, their biological legacy. It was what would allow the Threnali to survive even if the Covenant consumed every planet they had ever inhabited. The Covenant wanted it destroyed. "They've been hunting you for 11 months, Marcus said. 14, she said. "Since my mother died. They caught up with me on this planet 7 months ago. I've been managing the distance since then." Those men outside the cafe, Covenant trackers. They're not soldiers, they're readers. They track biological signatures. She touched her left wrist, where, beneath the glove, Marcus now noticed a faint ridge. "I have a dampener embedded under the skin. It's been degrading. In approximately 3 weeks, my signature will be fully readable." "And the transmission window?" She looked up. 4 weeks, she said. There was a long silence. The kettle clicked off. Marcus got up and made 2 cups of tea, which was absurd, except that it gave him somewhere to put his hands while the universe reorganized itself around him. He set a cup in front of her. She wrapped her gloved hands around it. "Why the cafe?" he said. She looked at the cup. "It was populated enough that I didn't stand out. And the man behind the counter," she said carefully, "noticed things about people without making them feel observed. That is a rare quality." He sat down. "I'm a barista, not a field agent." "I know." For the first time, something flickered in her expression that might have been guilt. "I'm sorry I brought this to your door." "You knocked on my door." "Yes." So something changed. She was quiet. "Then the tracker I burned getting away from them tonight will be replaced. There will be more of them tomorrow, and I think—" She stopped. "I think it would be less lonely to not handle the next 3 weeks alone." Marcus looked at her. The cafe downstairs was quiet. The street outside was ordinary. The universe, it turned out, was significantly larger than he had previously understood, and a woman, an alien, the last heir to a royal bloodline, hunted across the galaxy, was sitting at his kitchen table with a bandage above her eye and both hands around a cup of tea. "Okay," he said. "You keep saying that. I find it helps." The next 3 weeks were, in Marcus's honest estimation, the strangest and most complete of his life. She stayed in his apartment. He kept it quiet, told his part-time employee, Diane, that a friend was crashing with him, and she spent the days helping in the cafe, which she approached with the intensity of someone studying for a final exam. She learned the machine. She learned the regulars. She memorized orders after hearing them once, which Marcus had to actively discourage because several of the regulars found it unsettling. She wore her gloves. She kept the high collar. She was careful, but she was also present in a way that Marcus hadn't expected. She asked questions about everything, not the broad existential ones he'd expected from an alien encountering human civilization, but specific, precise ones. Why did the man in the suit always put his phone face down when he sat but face up when he stood? Why did the nurses always order in pairs and never alone? Why did the retired couple argue about their order if they ordered the same thing every time? Because the arguing is the point. Marcus said. They've been together 40 years. They don't need to order. They need to still be talking to each other. She turned that over for a long moment. That is, she said, unexpectedly efficient. He taught her to make a proper flat white. She taught him 3 words in Thranali that didn't have English equivalents, one of which meant roughly the feeling of understanding something after spending a long time being wrong about it. He used it on her the next morning. She gave him the kind of look that made his chest feel strange. At night, she would sit at the kitchen table with her notebook, writing in a language that moved down the page in spiraling columns, and Marcus would read or work on the cafe's books across from her, and they would be quiet together in a way that was comfortable before either of them had noticed it becoming that. She told him about the Thranali, a people of enormous patience, slow to war, architects of 3,000 years of recorded history. She told him about her mother, brilliant, formal, deeply loved, dead in an instant when the Covenant strike came at a diplomatic summit. She told him that she had been a student when it happened, not yet crowned, not yet officially heir, and that the only reason she had survived was because her mother had sent her away 3 days before with a message she hadn't understood until it was too late to go back. Get the seed vault out of reach. Do not let it die with us. Marcus told her about the engineering job, the breakdown he still didn't have words for, the loan, the machine that sounded like a small aircraft, the way the neighborhood had changed around the cafe, and the particular stubbornness required to stay still in the center of something moving. You built something, she said, a coffee shop, from wreckage, with your own hands, because you believed it should exist. She looked at him across the table. My people would not call that small. He didn't have an answer. He found he was looking at her face in the low kitchen light, the silver gray of her skin, the faint glow at her collarbone, the violet of her eyes, and thinking that the word beautiful felt inadequate in a way that was itself a kind of answer. She looked back. Neither of them said anything. He went to bed. He lay there for a while thinking about the words she'd taught him, the feeling of understanding something after spending a long time being wrong about it, and how efficiently it applied to the present situation. The Covenant arrived on a Saturday morning at 7:42, while the cafe was at peak rush. Marcus was mid-pour on a macchiato when the emergency broadcast came through on every phone in the building simultaneously, followed immediately by every phone on the street outside, followed by an extraordinary sound from the sky above the city, a resonance that was not quite heard and not quite felt, but existed somewhere in between, settling into the bones like a tuning fork held to the skull. 300 ships. That was the number that came through the broadcast, though ships was a word that failed to contain what appeared in the sky over every major population center on Earth simultaneously. They were dark and vast and geometrically precise, arranged in a pattern that was clearly a grid and clearly a statement, visible in daylight like a new kind of cloud that didn't move. Marcus's phone showed a government emergency alert, then a second alert, then a message from his sister that was just her name and 3 question marks. He looked at the cafe. 12 people frozen mid-sentence, faces tilted toward the windows or their phones, caught between the human instinct to look at the sky and the human instinct to find an explanation. He looked at Vera. She was standing behind the counter where he'd left her, and she was not looking at the sky. She was looking at him. How long? He said. They triangulated faster than I expected. Her voice was completely steady, which was somehow worse than panic. The dampener failed this morning. They'll have a precise location within the hour. And then? They'll send a ground team. Marcus looked at his customers. The retired couple. The nurses. The man in the suit who was staring at his phone like it had betrayed him. Diane, behind the secondary counter, who had gone completely white. Everyone, Marcus said, in the clear, unhurried voice he had learned, without knowing he was learning it, from 6 years of managing small crises in a small space. I need you to pay attention to me for a second. They looked at him. People in strange situations, Marcus had discovered, were extremely willing to look at whoever seemed to know what they were doing. We are going to close for the morning. I need everyone to head home or to a public building, the library 2 blocks over, the hospital on Clement. Don't use the transit system until we know more. If you don't have anywhere to go, you can stay here and we'll figure it out. But I need you to do it calmly, and I need you to do it now." It took 4 minutes. He helped the retired couple get a cab. He gave Diane his address in Portland with instructions to call his sister if she couldn't reach him. He held the door and said, "Be safe" to each person who left, meaning it. When the cafe was empty, he locked the front door and turned around. Vera was already at the table, her notebook open. Her gloves were off for the first time he'd seen, and her hands, elongated slightly, with the same faint luminescence as her collarbone, moved over the notebook with extraordinary speed. "You cleared the room," she said, not looking up. "Seemed like the logical move. You did it in 4 minutes. I also lied to them. I don't actually know if the library is a good option." "It is," she said. "The building's metal frame will diffuse the targeting signal. I should have told you that." She paused. "I should have told you many things earlier." He sat across from her. "What are you doing?" "Calculating whether the transmission window can be opened early. It's set to align with a relay position. The window is narrow, 40 minutes, and it opens in 18 days. She looked up. "I do not have 18 days. What do you need to open it early?" "An amplifier. The relay will have moved, which means the angle is wrong, which means I need something to boost the signal enough to compensate." She looked around the cafe. Something with significant electromagnetic output. Marcus looked at the espresso machine. It was, genuinely, the most powerful piece of equipment in the building. He had complained about its electricity bill to his accountant for 6 years. He had described its sound more than once as reminiscent of a small aircraft preparing for takeoff. "Tell me," he said slowly, "what you actually need." What followed was 45 minutes that Marcus later tried and failed to explain to anyone who hadn't been there. Vera had, built into her left wrist beside the dampener, a transmission device roughly the size and shape of a coin that she removed with a tool from her notebook, with the practiced efficiency of someone who had planned for this scenario. The device needed a boost, not enormous, she explained, but concentrated and clean. The espresso machine produced at full pressure an electromagnetic output that was, by any normal metric, irrelevant. By alien transmission standards, it was apparently extraordinary. "I need to route the signal through the pressure coils," she said, "and invert the—" "Show me," Marcus said. She showed him. It took his engineer's brain approximately 6 minutes to understand what she was describing, and another 12 to help her do it, working together across the machine's back panel with her tools and his understanding of the building's electrical system. They were flat on the floor behind the counter when the first Covenant ground team arrived. The team materialized outside the window. Not from a vehicle, but simply from the air, in a shimmer of displacement that Marcus registered as profoundly wrong before his brain caught up to what he was seeing. There were 8 of them, tall, dark-coated, moving with absolute synchronization. One of them put a hand flat against the glass. "If they come through the door," Vera said quietly, beneath the counter. "I need 1 more minute." Marcus reached up without looking and grabbed the ceramic honeypot from the counter. "Then I'll buy you 2, he said. He stood up. The thing about facing 8 alien soldiers through a plate glass window with a ceramic honeypot was that it was objectively absurd. Marcus knew this. He stood behind the counter of his cafe in his canvas apron, and he looked at the lead soldier, who was nearly 7 feet tall and had eyes like Vera's but colder, like light bouncing off ice. And he did not move. The soldier put his hand on the door. Marcus put his hand on the espresso machine's main power switch. The soldier paused. "This machine," Marcus said, knowing the soldier almost certainly did not speak English and not particularly caring, "runs at 140 psi. I've had it for 6 years, and it has never once failed to make an obscene amount of noise at the worst possible moment." He clicked the switch. The machine groaned to life, its full pressure sequence beginning, every coil, every valve, the sound climbing toward that aircraft departing runway pitch. "I don't know what that does to your equipment, but I'm guessing you haven't spent 6 years learning what it does to mine." The lead soldier held still. He was calculating. Marcus could see it, the stillness of something running probabilities, weighing variables. An ordinary human male, standing in an ordinary cafe, who had not run, had not begged, had not done any of the things that the Covenant's extensive behavioral profiles of primitive species said he should do. He was standing there with a honeypot and a coffee machine like they were in negotiating position. The machine reached full pressure. The sound filled the cafe, filled the street. Vera said, from below the counter, "Now." She pressed the transmission device to the modified coil housing. The signal went out. Marcus had expected light. There was no light. There was a change in the pressure of the room, subtle and immediate, like the moment before lightning, and then it was over. The lead soldier outside took a step back. And then, above the city, above every city where 300 Covenant ships hung in their precise threatening grid, something happened. The ships moved, not away, not toward anything. They rearranged slowly and visibly into a new formation, one that the emergency broadcasts would later describe as defensive, and that Vera would tell Marcus, in the quiet of his apartment that night, was the Covenant formation for treaty negotiation. The Threnali resistance fleet had received the coordinates. They were coming, and the Covenant knew it. The Covenant ground team left without breaking the glass. Marcus stood in his empty cafe for a long moment after they were gone, listening to the machine wind down from its full pressure cycle, and then he sat down on the floor behind the counter. Vera sat beside him. They were silent for a while. "The resistance," he said. "How long?" 30 hours. Perhaps less. She looked at her hands, bare, luminescent in the low light. "When they arrive, the Covenant will be forced to negotiate. They cannot fight a two-front conflict, and the Seed Vault's coordinates are now with people who can use them." She paused. "They will not get what they came for." "And you?" "I will be required to represent the Threnali in whatever negotiation follows." She said this the way someone says something they have been carrying for a long time without being allowed to put it down. "I have been running for 14 months. I am very tired of running." "You've been drinking coffee in my cafe for 6 weeks, Marcus said. "You could have run. You kept coming back." She looked at him. "Yes," she said, "I did." He looked back at her. The silver gray of her, the violet eyes, the faint light at her collarbone. The woman who had watched the man in the suit for 20 minutes and understood his whole situation from the movement of his left hand, who had learned to make a flat white and asked precise questions about 40-year marriages and eaten muffins from paper bags like she was translating a language she intended to become fluent in. "I kept putting your name on the cup," he said. "I know. You didn't have to." "I know I didn't have to." She was quiet. Then, slowly, she said, "On Threnali, when someone makes a place for you without being asked, a seat at a table, a cup before you arrive, a way out through the kitchen, it means something specific. What does it mean?" "It means," she said, "that they see you, not what you carry, not what you are, you." Marcus thought about the honeypot. The corner table kept clear. The way he'd said okay twice and meant it both times. "I'm a barista," he said. "You are an engineer who built something with his hands because he believed it should exist." She looked at him steadily. "And you stood in front of 8 Covenant soldiers with a honeypot." "In my defense, I didn't have anything better." "Yes, you did." She tilted her head slightly. "You had the machine. The machine was doing the important work." "You were doing the important work," she said. "The machine was just loud." He laughed. She smiled. A real smile, not the careful, practiced versions she'd used in the first weeks, but something unguarded. They sat on the floor behind the counter of his cafe, and above them, through the ceiling and the roof and the sky, 300 ships rearranged themselves into the shape of a question instead of a threat. The next 30 hours were, by any objective measure, the most chaotic in human history. Military aircraft appeared over every major city. Emergency broadcasts cycled in 40 languages. Half the internet collapsed under the weight of simultaneous video uploads of the sky. The other half spent the time arguing about whether the footage was real, which Marcus found almost comforting in its predictability. The Threnali resistance arrived at 27 hours. Not 300 ships, but 11, which was apparently significantly more alarming to the Covenant, because 11 resistance ships meant 11 ships of specific capability and intention, whereas 300 Covenant ships meant an occupation force trying to look inevitable. Vera spent most of those 27 hours on the phone. Not Marcus's phone, but a device she'd had in the notebook all along, flat and dark, that lit up when the resistance reached the outer solar system and began showing her a stream of information in spiraling Threnali text. She spoke to people he couldn't see in a language he couldn't follow, but he could read her well enough by then to know when the news was good and when it was difficult, and he brought her coffee at the moments when it was difficult and stayed out of her way at the moments when it was good. At hour 19, she looked up from the device and said, "There's a complication." "Of course there is. The Covenant wants a human signatory on the negotiation agreement." He stared at her. "I know," she said. "It's an unusual request. But they've been watching what happened in this building, and there are 8 soldiers who reported the same thing back to their command." She looked at him. A human who did not retreat, who improvised under conditions of extreme duress, who protected someone they were not obligated to protect, without prior arrangement, without calculation, in a situation where retreat was entirely possible, and not retreating was not. She paused. "The Covenant's behavioral models have no category for what you did. I stood behind a counter with a honey pot. You refused to leave." She said it quietly. "That is what they have no category for. Every behavioral model the Covenant uses for pre-contact species includes, as a foundational assumption, that individuals will prioritize self-preservation above social bonds when facing lethal threat." She looked at him with the full weight of those violet eyes. "You did not." Marcus thought about that. He thought about the retired couple he'd helped into a cab, the way he'd told Diane to call his sister, the way he'd been on the floor helping with the machine because they'd needed 2 more minutes, and it hadn't occurred to him to consider whether those 2 minutes were worth the risk. "People do that," he said. "Not every people," she said. "Not in our experience. You haven't met the right people." She looked at him for a long moment. "I think," she said carefully, "that I have now." He signed the agreement. It was not a simple document. It was a series of protocols, technically speaking, encoding terms under which the Covenant acknowledged the Threnali seed vault as protected under Galactic preservation law and agreed to suspend territorial aggression in Threnali space pending formal negotiation. In exchange, the transmission coordinates were sealed from military use for a period of 40 Threnali years. The human signatory line was, Vera explained, a legal mechanism, a formal record that a representative of Earth's dominant species had witnessed the agreement and found it satisfactory. It created, under Covenant law, a protected status for Earth as a witness civilization. It was, in practical terms, the single most important thing Marcus Webb had ever signed, and it was witnessed in the back of a cafe on the corner of Ashby and 5th, on a scavenged piece of parchment-like Threnali material that Vera produced from the notebook, using a stylus that she handed to him without ceremony. He signed it, Marcus Webb, Groundwork Coffee. She smiled when she read it. "It will be recorded," she said, "exactly as written." "Good," he said. "I worked hard on that name." The ships left in stages over the next 4 days. By Thursday, the sky was ordinary again, or as ordinary as it could be after 5 days of extraordinary, which was to say that people stood on sidewalks looking up at nothing with the expression of people who had experienced something they would spend the rest of their lives not entirely believing. The Threnali resistance ship, one of the 11, designated as Vera's formal escort, settled into a holding position at the edge of the solar system and waited. She came into the cafe on Friday morning. He had the medium drip ready. She sat at the corner table. The honey pot was on the side counter. He came and sat across from her. "How long?" he said. "The formal negotiations will take 6 months, possibly more. I'm needed on the ship." She looked at her cup. "After that, the Threnali Council has to be reformed, a new seat of government established. The seed vault has to be properly archived. It will take years." "Okay." She looked up. "You keep saying that. I find it helps." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city moved past the window, delivery trucks, pedestrians, the retired couple appearing at the corner and beginning their slow walk toward the cafe, already visible and already, Marcus suspected, arguing about something that didn't matter. "I could come back," she said, "when the most urgent work is done." There is precedent for diplomatic liaisons spending time on witness worlds. There's also precedent, Marcus said, for people spending time in places where someone keeps a seat for them. She looked at him. The light came through the window at the angle it came to every morning, and it caught her hair and turned it deep blue, and her eyes were violet and steady, and she had her gloved hands around the cup, and the honey pot was on the counter behind her, and Marcus thought about the words she'd taught him, the feeling of understanding something, after spending a long time being wrong about it, and let it settle. The man behind the counter, she said quietly, who noticed things without making people feel observed. That's me. I noticed things too, she said, about him. I know you did. She reached across the table and put her hand, gloved, warm, unmistakably hers, over his. I'll come back, she said. I'll keep the corner table open. Outside, the retired couple reached the door and came in, already made argument about whether they wanted the large or the small, which meant the large, which had always meant the large, which would always mean the large, which was exactly the point. Marcus got up to take their order. Vera watched him and wrote something in her notebook in spiraling Threnali columns, which he could not read, and she would not translate until much later, when she came back, when the wars were quieter and the negotiations were settled and the galaxy had made a little more room for two civilizations to figure out what they meant to each other. What it said, translated as closely as the language allowed, was, "The man who stays when he could leave. The place that exists because someone believed it should. The understanding that arrives late and stays." Underneath it, in careful English, practiced, deliberate, selected from a list of all available options, worth coming back for, the Threnali Covenant Accord was formally ratified 11 months later. It is the first galactic legal document to list a coffee shop as a place of diplomatic significance. The corner table at Groundwork was eventually photographed by 17 different news organizations and described in a piece that won a journalism award as the most significant piece of furniture in human history. Marcus Webb described it as a perfectly normal table. I don't know what everyone's talking about. He kept the honey pot on the counter. She came back in the spring.